Okay, Chapter 14 of Staying Fat for Sarah Burns. Boy, today the stakes went up. Maud's barged into Lemery's class to say Mark Britton tried to kill himself last night. Maud looked directly at Lemery, then me, then Ellerby, and finally Jody, as if to let us know where he considered the blame to lie. "I'm not pleased with what I saw in here yesterday," he said after his announcement, "nor with what I've heard about what goes on in here. A sensitive boy—" "Stop!" Lemery said, with such force that Maud backed off immediately. "I'm not interested in your personal thoughts about suicide, sir, and you have no right to imply that the responsibility for Mark Britton's decision lay with members of this class." "Ms. Lemery," Maud said right back, "maybe you don't know how serious this is. Mark Britton is lying in Sacred Heart Hospital on the edge of a coma as a result of a drug overdose. This wasn't some adolescent cry for attention." "I feel as badly as you do about that as you do," Lemery said. "Maybe you've forgotten that Mark is a member of my swimming team, and I respect him as a student. But you are out of line in this classroom, and if you don't leave, I'll lodge a formal complaint with the Washington Education Association." Maud's eyes blazed. "Ms. Lemery, I'm the vice principal at this school." "That's right," Ms. Lemery said. "You're the vice principal in charge of discipline. If I'm having a discipline problem, I'll call you. Right now, I'd like you to leave, or I'll go to the principal's office and bring Mr. Patterson back here to straighten this out. If you'd like to talk to me during my break, that's third period." "You could be getting yourself into serious trouble," Maud said, but he looked uneasy, as if Lemery had scored. "I want you out of my classroom," she repeated, and Maud turned to leave. The guy must be unconscious. He never noticed how the class sat stunned at the news of Mark, how the breath blasted out of the room as if we'd been kicked in the collective stomach. "I'm sorry you had to hear that," Lemery said the moment the door closed behind Maud. We stared blankly back at her. "Looks like this is a good time to talk about suicide." She gave us a minute, then softly, "Let's talk." "Oh, God," Jody burst into tears. "He really meant to do it. I know Mark. He really meant to do it. This is my fault." She dropped her head to her desk, and I tried to take her hand, but she pulled it away. "Let her be," Lemery said. Then, "I know you think it's your fault, and I know that hurts, and it's going to hurt. There's no stopping that, but it's not your fault. Mark Britton himself said we're all responsible for our own actions, and this was his, Jody, not yours. But if I'd been more careful, I knew what he was like. I knew—" Ellerby stepped in. "If you're going to assign guilt," he said, "you can't assign it all to yourself. I've been badgering Mark Britton for more than 2 years. "Maybe," Jody said through more tears, "but I humiliated him. I went with him for 2.5 years, and I knew that." A flood of anger welled in my throat, and I thought for a minute I'd actually choke on it. Mark Britton humiliated himself. Screw Mark Britton. He'd been cramming his philosophy down our throats as long as I could remember, and now that his true colors had been uncovered, we were supposed to feel shitty. Lemery slowly paced the outer edge of our circle. "Listen, a person attempting to take his own life is a tragic thing. I'm sure everyone here can think of something they wish they'd said to Mark, but none of us knew. Obviously, Mr. Watts thinks I should take responsibility because of what I let us talk about as a class, but I want no misunderstandings. I'm not to blame for Mark's decision, and neither are any of you. Suicide is personal, and I refuse to have anyone walk out of here today without understanding that. Mark Britton needs help. Hopefully this will help him get it. He'll need understanding from all of you. He'll need to not be abandoned. But your guilt will only give him the mistaken belief that his actions were not of his own doing." Lemery stopped pacing. "I don't want to sound harsh, but I know I'm probably getting ahead of your feelings. But we don't have time to process everyone's pain before the class is over. We do have time to put it in perspective. Sally Eton, the girl who pickets the abortion clinic at Deaconess regularly, and who thinks Mark Britton is the cleverest thing since remote control, raised her hand. "Miss Lemery, I've known Mark for a long time, and he's somebody who stands up for what he believes. I think he's too sensitive for the callous way this class looks at things. Some cruel and untrue things have been said, and I think he's been treated unfairly by all of you, and this is the result. Lemery cut her off. You can have your thoughts about that, Sally, but I repeat, no one is responsible for Britton's decisions but Mark Britton. I agree we can all learn something about how fragile the human psyche is, but the lesson here is to look at our own thoughts about life and death, not to take the blame for someone else's. Sally started to protest, but Lemery continued quickly. You're entitled to your feelings, Sally, and I'll be happy to talk with you after class, but I won't have anyone blaming anyone for this in my classroom. That's final. Sally stood and gathered her books, bursting into tears. That's fine. I'm dropping this class. You can flunk me if you want. This class is mean. That's why Mark Britton is in the hospital. I thought Lemery would stop her, but she walked to the classroom phone and called the office to let them know Sally was out of class and very distressed. She said she thought Maud's might be able to help her. At her desk, she heaved a sigh. Anyone else? Silence. One of the worst things schools do is give you the idea that they can take responsibility for other people. We want the best athletes and students and debaters to be role models, to set examples for the other kids. We pressure many of you to do that all the time. We ask for perfection, no, for a show of perfection. Then we're disappointed when you let us down. And even if we're not, you are. Well, I want to go on record as saying, the sooner you learn you're your own life's accountant, the sooner you'll have tools to hammer out a decent life. Mark Britton is in the hospital because he tried to poison his body. He felt bad because of his responses to the world, not yours. Other people may try to tell you differently, but don't let them. You won't be helping yourself, and you won't be helping Mark Britton. We sat in silence, absorbing Lemery's words. That silence was interrupted by Maud's booming voice over the intercom. Mrs. Lemery, could you come to the office immediately, please? Thank you. When the bell rang, ending class, Lemery hadn't returned. Workout felt strange today. Britton wasn't leading his circle pattern, and there was no one to go after. Though Ellaby and I gave each other good challenges, playing games with the clock. When Britton's group knelt to pray before the first set of 200s, I found myself looking away, a bit ashamed. I could have laid off him a little. I meant to ask Lemery why she didn't get back before the bell, but I never got the chance. At home, Mom said pretty much what Lemery said, but a little voice nags at me, saying I should be more careful. None of that is at Jodi's expense, though. I don't think I should have stayed away from her, and I'm not going to start. Britton did what he did at the abortion clinic, and trying to take himself out on drugs doesn't buy him any sympathy from me in that regard. I could do with a little less confusion. I got a bit of a kickstart from Carver, Mom's boyfriend. He listened quietly to our conversation. Jodi was here for dinner, then followed Jodi and me out into the garage. I was on the stepladder pulling down some canned goods Mom keeps stored in the high cupboards when he said it. My father killed himself. Excuse me? My dad. He killed himself. I glanced over at Jodi, then back at him. God, man, I'm sorry. He smiled. I didn't say it for sympathy, Eric. It was a long time ago. I was 8. I thought it had to be my fault. He was always mad at me, because of things I couldn't do. I was halfway through a week's grounding for my grades when he killed himself. He put a gun in his mouth. I was off the ladder now, standing with an armload of cans, speechless. I was 35 when I finally came to the conclusion that it wasn't my fault. I'd gotten very depressed, and a guy I worked with talked me into seeing someone, a therapist, who talked me into tracking down family members who could tell me about Dad. Turned out, no one was all that surprised. Seems he was one of those guys who just felt bad all his life and decided to get out. His brother took me on a long camping trip into the Idaho primitive area. 3 days we hiked in. I was so lost I couldn't have found my way out in an airplane. And Uncle Ned wouldn't bring me out until he was convinced I knew everything about my dad he could teach me. And until he was convinced I knew Dad wrote the end to his own story. Your teacher was right, guys. Taking on someone else's monsters will kill you. He turned and walked back into the house. Thank you, Jodi said as the door closed, then turned to me. He's a good one, Eric. I knocked on Lemery's door tonight, sometime after 10:30, after dropping Jody off. You guys still up? Yep, some of us. Is everything okay? You from Block Watch? No, I mean at school. Come on in, Moby, she said, and I kicked the snow off my shoes and stepped in, handing her my leather jacket. She hung it on the coat stand and walked into the living room where Sarah Burns sat in her pajamas and a robe, drinking hot chocolate. Ms. Burns and I are having a discussion on risk-taking, Lemery said. Sarah Burns looked up at me a bit sheepishly, I thought. We're going to try to find my mother, give her one chance to do the right thing. That Lemery is some kind of genius. No way I could have figured she'd pull off an alliance with the orneriest kid north of the equator. We have been reevaluating our lives, she said with a smile. If we don't start taking some chances, we're both going to make the same mistakes over so many times we'll rot. I understood about Sarah Burns, but why Lemery? She went on. I'm trying to decide whether to rip out Mautz's heart, hold it a second for him to get a good look, then give him a loud round of applause. I flinched. What for? Mr. Patterson went out of town this afternoon, which makes Mautz acting principal for 3 days. He suspended cat class because Mark Britton's father came to the school to complain, charging I was irresponsible in my handling of sensitive material, leading to Mark's suicide attempt. To hell with Mautz, I said. Let's have class anyway. We'll organize a protest. Lemery smiled. Thanks, but no thanks, Moby. That would be a protest orchestrated by you and Ellerby. Sort of like a picnic organized by ants. No offense. Actually, I'm going to take 3 days sick leave. Ms. Burns and I are going to Reno to try out a blackjack system she heard about in her math class. Reno. What are we going to do for Cat? What about swimming? Study hall for Cat? That couldn't hurt anyone. And John Billings for workouts. I've already written up the workouts and called John. He's willing to drive the bus to the meet on Friday, too. Sarah Burns smiled like a little kid and shrugged. You said I could trust her, she said. Swim fast. We'll see you on Monday. I had never seen her calm. I pulled out a quarter and flipped it to her. Put all on 17 black. I got home after midnight, and all the lights were out, except in the hallway leading to my room. A note was tacked to my door. A man called looking for Sarah Burns. I said I didn't know where she is, but he left a number for you to call no matter how late you got home. 482-4366. Mom. Shit. I took the note at its word and dialed the number. Yeah. Hello, this is Eric Calhoun. I had a message to call you. It said I should call. Yeah. Well, young Calhoun, do you know who this is? Yes, I said. I assume it's Mr. Burns, Sarah Burns' dad? Well, you assume correct. We were both silent a minute until I said, why did you want me to call? Why do you think? I was scared to death, but unwilling to say anything he didn't know. I don't know, sir. I just got home, and there was this note. Don't mess around with me, boy. I held to it. I'm not messing around, sir. Why did you want me to call? He was quiet another second. Then in a low, dangerous voice, he said, Now you listen, and you listen good. I know you know where my daughter is, and you best be telling me before you hang up that phone, or I'll skin you alive. And that ain't just a figure of speech. I want no more of your nonsense. Tell me where the girl is. My heart hammered in my throat, my voice shaky as if a vibrator were poised on my Adam's apple. I don't know where she is, I said. I haven't seen her since right before she left the hospital. She was mad at me. Did you hear me say I wanted no more of your nonsense? Yes, sir, this isn't nonsense. His low laugh chilled my spine. I can smell your fear clear across town, he said. I'll give you one more chance, then I'm hanging up. If that happens, you better be on the watch for me every minute. Next time you and me talk, it'll be up close. I'll hurt you, boy. Believe that. I'm not denying I'm scared, I said, but I don't know where Sarah Burns is. If you're threatening me, I'll call the cops. The same laugh. Be my guest. The line went dead. Okay, chapter 14 analysis. There is a saying, adding fuel to the fire, which means it's already hot and it's already kind of like crazy. And then you add fuel to the fire, which means you're making the fire bigger. And in this chapter, we add fuel to the fire and then add fuel to the fire again. Right off the bat, we hear that Britton tried to commit suicide. And I think, unfortunately, this has a believable feel to it. Mark is a very high-strung boy. He's very confident in his vision of the world and of himself, and he had that confidence shaken when people said that the image he projected to the world was a false one, that he was not the good person that he said he was, or that he acted like he was. And so he attempted suicide. And I think Lemery does a very nice job here of trying to make sure the kids understand that while they might have influenced Mark, the decision was still his. I do think, though, it is interesting. We have to be observant of other people's feelings. And I think in this particular case, it's a little minimized. I do think, Eric and Ellerby and Jody, they could have done this differently. Do I think this is how kids handle things? I do. So while I wish they could handle it better, I'm not sure that they could have, given that they're kids and don't know how. On top of that, we have Mott's raising the sort of temperature here by creating conflict with Lemery. And then finally, we have even more conflict where we have Sarah Burns' father, Virgil Burns, essentially threatening Eric and telling him, well, I guess if you're not going to tell me where she is, we're going to have problems, and I don't care, you're a kid. This story just keeps getting crazier, and I hope you're handling it well, because it is a wild ride, and it's about to get even wilder. All right, see you in chapter 15.